sometimes as we get older, and also with these kind of unfortunately outdated notions of leadership, you have this idea of, well, I should know everything, so I'm not going to ask, or I'm embarrassed to ask, or I'm shamed to ask, when the best leaders are learners and the best leaders have the best questions.
Welcome to the Midlife Reinvention Podcast. I'm your host, Kavita, and the founder of Power Purpose Play, a global community of women in midlife. I'm here to tell you that it's your time now to rediscover what has always been inside of you and bring that out into the world. If you're wondering what's next, but don't know quite what that is, or if you feel a twinge in your heart telling you that you have so much more to do and so much more to offer, you're in the right place. Ask yourself, if not now, when? Do you want to leave your job, start your own business, take control of your health, reignite the passion in your marriage, write that book, or at least that first chapter? Transitions like this can be daunting, but through listening to my story and interviews with incredible women every week, I hope to inspire you to take action. I rediscovered myself after the age of 50, and I know you can too. It's my time now to help you do just that. I'm so excited you're here. Let's dive in. Hi, my dear friend, and thank you for being here. It's hard to believe that September is upon us in just a few days. I actually love this time of year. It's actually like the new year, as we're all doing some sort of planning for the months ahead. If you have children who are starting a new year of school, I wish them all the very best. It can be so exciting, but also a nervous time for many, as we are pushed out of our comfort zones, especially this year, when we're able to finally see one another in person after COVID. What will this new year bring? Will I make new friends? How will my classes be? I'm sure all these questions are running through my son's mind as he prepares for his new school adventure. I couldn't be happier for him and all of our wonderful kids. It also got me thinking about the topic of this week's podcast, which is really on leadership. How do you lead in your life? We instantly think of work when we talk about leadership in terms of the roles we play at work. How is your leadership at work evolving? I encourage you, however, to also think of the broader term of leadership. How are you leading at home? In your relationships, both intimate and social? Are you making them a priority? How are you leading in your health and wellness? Is that something you need to spend more time on? And what about your spiritual connection and looking after yourself? Are you taking some time for you? The reason I ask these questions is because as women especially, we are juggling so many things all at once. Often we don't know which area in our lives to prioritize and how to put our attention on those things. I invite you to consider that now is the time to do this. Not in 6 months or in a year, but now. There is no time like the present to take charge of your life and evaluate what is important to you, what you want to do now, how you want to contribute moving forward, and to finally let go of what is holding you back. I'm here to help, and I am super excited to do that in several ways this fall. As you know, I'm a certified women's midlife transitions coach, which means I can work one-on-one with you to guide you through this important time in your life. My clients have experienced so much growth and action in very short periods of time. My 3-month coaching program, It's My Time Now, is open for a few more clients at this time. I'm also super excited to share that my group coaching program is also starting the week of October 17th for 6 weeks of transformational and eye-opening training. I will lead you and a group of 9 other like-minded women who are serious about taking this next stage of life and making it the best stage ever. I will come in live every week for 90-minute sessions where I'll take you through proprietary tools and templates, and you'll have access to my online course as well, which has a wealth of information and exercises to work through. If you enjoy the company and learning from me and other women who are going through similar circumstances that you may be going through, this is for you. Email me at kavita@powerpurposeplay.ca and tell me why you are interested in this program. I have really poured my heart and soul into this, and I guarantee you, you will not be disappointed. Remember, email me today and I will put you on the waiting list. This is limited to 10 women, so contact me today and I will give you further details. I will also be coming in live every week on LinkedIn and Facebook with my weekly tips and reflections starting next Wednesday, September 7th at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'd love it if you joined and shared your comments during the live stream. This is something I've wanted to do for a while, and guess what? I'm going to do it now because I've decided to grow myself in this area and take leadership so I can be more available and present for you. The one way you can further support my mission to empower 1 million women in midlife worldwide is to share this podcast with your friends. It's easy. Just share the link. You can hear it directly from our website at powerpurposeplay.ca or on Apple, Spotify, Google, and all the other major podcast channels. Thanks so much, and I hope you enjoy this next episode with the beautiful Palena Neale. I'll be at the end with the key takeaways. Welcome, everyone, to this week's episode of the Midlife Reinvention Podcast. I'm your host, Kavita Ahuja, and the founder of Power Purpose Play, and we are a global community of women in midlife. I'm also a certified life transition and core energy coach, and my bold mission is to empower 1 million women in midlife worldwide to find your true inner power and purpose, and to say with confidence, it's my time now. As part of this mission, I interview incredible women for this podcast who share their stories of reinvention and who will give you their advice on how to overcome the obstacles in your way to reach your own vision for yourself in your next stage of life. This week is no exception, and that I'm honored to have on the show today, Palena Neale. Palena is an accredited executive and leadership coach and educator, highly experienced in organizational and leadership development for the private sector, UN, government, nonprofit, and academic organizations. She has designed and delivered leadership programs across 4 continents and founded Unabridged, a leadership development practice providing bespoke coaching, mentoring, and learning for greater personal, professional, and social impact. Palena runs leadership coaching programs for women and hosts a women's leadership workshop series. She also lectures on MBA programs and delivers training for UN leaders as well as corporate clients. Palena holds a PhD in gender and international relations and is a regular contributor to Forbes, Psychology Today, and the Harvard Business Review. Wow, that's super impressive, Palena. Thank you so much to be on the show, and I'm so glad to have you here.
Well, thank you, Kavita. I'm delighted to be here. And before we start, thank you for the work you're doing.
Oh, well, you're welcome. It's a passion of mine, and I know we have similar passions in terms of encouraging women and in terms of their leadership and just leadership in both work and life. So I'm excited to get into what you do and how you got there. So Palena, you really are, as I just described in your bio, you're very a recognized leader in women's coaching and leadership coaching, as well as being a lecturer and a mentor. So before we get into what you're doing now, maybe you could give us a bit of an idea of how did you get from what you're doing now, and what kind of, do you have a reinvention story? Is there something that prompted you to do what you're doing today?
Oh, thank you. Absolutely. Story, reinvention, all of that good stuff. So if I can just set the scene for a moment, because it has certainly informed my journey. I actually grew up in Canada, where you're based, and yes. I grew up in a fairly modest household. We didn't have a lot of means. We didn't have connections. I was actually the first person to go to university in my family. And so that really taught me early on that if I wanted things to be different, I had to do I had to find my own opportunities, and I also had to do that. That requires a lot of reaching out.
Mm-hmm.
Add to that, I have always been and still am a confirmed introvert. So this was going to mean that I spend a lot of time living outside of my comfort zone. And I just want to own that up front, because I think that I'm certainly not the only person who has that. So if I think about my first act, I actually did a Bachelor of Commerce in Canada, and I was recruited right out of business school to CP Rail, and I was working in marketing. It was absolutely a great opportunity. But I realized fairly quickly on that did not light me up. That was not where my passion was. And so that was great information.
Right.
And so what I decided to do is dig in and try and find out what makes me tick, what lights me up. And this led me down a different path. And I actually applied for a Rotarian ambassadorial scholarship, which I was successful in obtaining. And it took me over to the UK. And that's where I started my studies in gender and international relations. And I continued on to do my PhD. And so what I learned from that experience is how important learning was as part of my life. I think I'd always known that, but it certainly solidified that. And I also realized that one of my core values was activism. It's always been service and helping, but I wanted to make sure I was quite active in doing that. So I was actually the only person in my cohort who didn't go into academia. And I took my first job, and this was for me a critical moment. I took my first job in what we call global development. And I took that with an organization called International Planned Parenthood Federation. And I know you have the Canadian Planned Parenthood Association in Canada.
Yeah.
So it was wonderful because I felt like I was really able to do work I loved. I was working in the leadership organizational development space in an organization I loved. So I was really living my values and my dream. And I did that for a number of years. And I came to 40. Now, this is a while back. I came to my 40th birthday and decided I wanted to go even further. So I actually found my dream job and my dream organization in one of my favorite countries in the world, Ethiopia. And I moved to Ethiopia. Yeah, I moved to Ethiopia.
I didn't expect that. Okay.
Oh, no, I have a love affair with Ethiopia, and actually a few. And I took my first entry into the UN. I was with UNAIDS at the time, the body in the UN that is responsible for the global HIV response. So I was absolutely loving this. And then something quite unexpected happened. While I was living and working in Ethiopia, an old friend reached out to me to reconnect. And connection is also an important theme in my journey. And this old friend who lives in France and is actually now my husband.
I was going to say friend. Okay.
Exactly.
Quote unquote, right?
Quote unquote. Exactly. Yes. So I was at a juncture where I kind of had to make a decision whether I was going to stay just simply in the career path or integrate other stuff into my life. So long story short, I decided to make the move to Paris, where my now husband is based. And this is the beginning of my reinvention story. I was, new continent, new country, new language, new culture, new role, wife, stepmother, sharing living space. So there was a lot going on for me at this moment in time. And I would say that it was certainly a career interruption, to say the least, in an environment that is that's tough to break into, I would say. So I really felt that at this moment in time, I had to go back to some of my core success strategies and look at how to find opportunities, how to continue to live outside of my comfort zone. And this was all going to be part of my reinvention, because I had certainly developed my identity in terms of my work. And now I didn't have that work, and I was absolutely at a loss as to what to do.
Mm-hmm.
So this is what really brought me to my second act. And I did what I normally do in times of crisis, because I did feel like I was in a few different crises.
Yes, yes.
So I went back to my spiritual home, which for me is education, and I did some postdoc research, and I also trained as a coach. And it was, for me, it was a bit ironic because I had been, as part of developing leadership development programs, I had organized coaching for many people, but
Yes.
I'd never had any coaching myself, let alone trained as a coach. So I did my coach training, and I was absolutely blown away. For me, it was such a transformational experience.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that's such an overused word. What does it mean? And I think it's different for everyone. But for me, I think what was so profound is the training, the experience first highlighted how resourceful we actually are and how many resources we have.
Yes.
We don't always have access to them. That doesn't mean they're not there.
Right.
And we all have the multiple opportunities to change. And I was just so excited by this that I wanted to share it with my tribe. And I still considered my tribe to be the global development people and organizations. So the first thing I did is I packaged up the learning and training that I did, the mentoring, and now the coaching into my practice, Unabridged. And it was really going to be this idea of bringing your whole self to the spaces in which you show up. So that was kind of the first piece. And then what really brought me to where I am at this moment in time was, it actually happened as a result of my very first coaching experience. So I was coaching this group of people, and I don't know if it was like this for you or others, but in the beginning, I didn't have a lot of clients. The people that I had as clients were all people from my network.
Yes.
And so I ended up having the people that I was coaching at the time, they delineated into two groups by gender. So I had this group of women who tended to be senior, a little bit older. I'd say kind of the youngest was 40 all the way up to close to 70. So very talented, educated, amazing women. And I had a group of men who had quite a different profile. They tended to be younger. They didn't have a lot of experience. They were often just finishing their MBA. Right. For many of them, it was their first job. And so what was happening, and of course, Kavita, this didn't happen. I didn't realize this right away, but what was happening throughout the coaching process is that the women never talked about themselves as leaders. They just talked about getting the work done or just getting on with it. Yet the men, literally from the very first coaching session, would come into the session and say, okay, I want to know how to develop my leadership so I can go further faster.
Interesting.
Exactly. So what I was taking from this is that in my experience, the many women weren't identifying as leaders. And the men, on the other hand, were from the very first session. And so this was something that I really wanted to get curious about. And so this is what really led me to design and deliver a women's leadership coaching program to focus specifically on the areas that some women, and again, clearly this is not applicable to every woman, but for some women find problematic. And so that is the beginning of my hyper focus on women's leadership. And I actually, like you, I consider this my passion and my privilege.
Yeah.
So that's where I am now.
Wow. Okay. That is such an interesting story. I was kind of caught up in it as you were talking. And I think if I can point out some themes that you mentioned, and firstly, the fact that you said that you're a confirmed introvert, I find it's, or you were, I'm not sure if you are anymore, but
no, I still am.
That's really interesting because I would never imagine that because of all the things that you mentioned that you've done and all that. And so that's a lesson for people that even if you think you're an introvert, you can get out of your comfort zone. And it sounds like throughout your background, you did get out of your comfort zone. I mean, moving from Canada and then to UK, then to Ethiopia and then back to Paris. So, I mean, those things they take a lot of courage. And so that's one lesson I would say. And then the other thing is that you mentioned a lot about your core values, which I
Mm-hmm.
think is so important for anybody. But, we're talking about women here, is to live according to your core values. And you said of activism and connection and getting out of your comfort zone, and also believing that there's so many opportunities to develop ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then your education, obviously you're highly educated, and you said that's your place and those are your values. So
Mm-hmm.
living according to our values, I believe is so important. And it's wonderful that you were able to kind of learn what you really wanted in your experiences and went for it. And I think that's one of the key things that I try to impart to my clients is that what is in your heart? What do you really value? What is your passion? So that you can design your life according to that. You don't have to wait for it. So those are some of the things. So thank you for sharing that. And I love that you kind of had that experience with your clients. And I also had a transformational experience with coaching. It's just changed. I was in the corporate world as well. And then when I decided to go along this route, it's so satisfying in many ways.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. But so let's focus now. So you're now in terms of women's leadership, you focus on women's leadership and coaching. And so that's why I'm focused on women, because I think there's so much potential that's still untapped. But where are we now? Where are we now with respect to women in leadership, and what kind of has it improved? What are the stats? What do the numbers say? And where are we going from here, kind of with respect to women in leadership? Hi, my friend. Kavita here. Do you often feel blocked from moving forward? We all feel that way at times. These are referred to as energy blocks. I've created a short, actionable PDF guide to help you release your negative energy blocks. Click the link in the description to download it now for free. Now, let's get back to the episode.
Great question, and I have some stats to share. So, for example, I like the report by Grant Thornton that I believe it's put out every year. And so, in the 2022 report, what we saw is that globally, so we're talking about the entire planet, women in senior management, including leadership, as they put it, is at 32%. So there's a small increase from 2021. It was 31%. And then, of course, there's regional variation. So, for example, in their report, they talk about North America and they include US and Canada is at 33% in 2022, so a little bit higher. I did try and find some stats on specifically with respect to Canada. And what I did find, and these might not be the most recent stats, but apparently the percentage of senior managers in Canada is at about 31%, so a little bit lower. And of course, and this is applicable across the board, in Canada, the number of women in the C-suite is at 21%. So the higher you go, clearly, you know these stats, the less women you have in senior leadership positions. And it's kind of glass half empty, glass half full. On a good day, I like to think, okay, we're moving in the right direction.
Right.
That said, the pace is very slow. And Antonio Guterres on International Women's Day basically said that if we continue at this rate, we're not going to achieve gender parity for 130 years. So I do think that we certainly have more work to do.
Absolutely. Wow, that's kind of staggering if you think about it. The C-suite is only 21%.
To be honest with you, again, and this is something maybe to dig into, but the numbers if you look at the S&P index or you look at the Fortune 500, the numbers are even lower. So it's really not, again, the higher you go, the less women you have. I know it's changing, but it's still changing slow.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that. I mean, we could talk about the reasons behind this probably for the whole podcast, but
Exactly.
I mean, we could talk about like society and all of that, but I want to let's focus instead on
Okay.
what women can do. What is it? So we talk a lot about here about our obstacles that we face in our lives as women,
Hmm.
especially women at 40s, 50s, and 60s, all women. But
Yeah.
so what is it that prevents us from moving forward? I mean, what holds women back from leading and being more visible? Like I know that when you talked about
Mm.
the two cohorts of the coaching,
Hmm.
then the men said, "Oh, tell me how to be a leader," and then the women were like, "Just tell me how to do the work." So why is that? Like, what are the
Mm.
obstacles that women face? And I mean,
You're
yeah, we could
right.
talk about that for the whole
We can
session
talk
too,
about
but
that. Exactly.
well, maybe some of the top ones that you've come
Um,
across.
Sure. So if we think about the leading piece, I think that, and again, we're always talking about some women. Clearly, there are exceptions, and
Of
I don't
course.
want to suggest that this is for everyone, but we can't forget things like social, culture, and gender norms that play a role, race, ethnicity, bias. There's the double bind. Women are always having that emotional charge, extra emotional charge of having to balance likability and competence. If you're too likable, you're dismissed. If you're too competent, you're the B word. That's an
Is that
additional.
what the double bind means?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, exactly.
Likability
So
and competence. Okay. Okay.
competence,
Yeah.
right. The anytime, anywhere mentality. Many women, especially women who have families, can't be anywhere, anytime. So then there's work family conflict. And then there's personal choice. Some women actually don't aspire. So and that's fine too.
Mm-hmm.
So those are kind of the big reasons. And we work on there's lots of areas you can work on, but if I'm sensing you'd like to be very practical. So I, one of the areas that I find is really problematic for women
Right.
is, again, some women, is this notion of making themselves and their work visible. And so lots of times there is a strong hesitation to not pursue visibility. One of the big reasons is, well, my work should speak for itself.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that worked in school and it worked in university, but organizations are very different beasts and they're much more complex. So that actually usually doesn't work. Sometimes there's gender backlash about being too visible. And again, going back to the double bind, if I'm too X, then there's a penalty that men don't necessarily suffer. The way you think about visibility. So for many of my women clients in the beginning, there's an association of visibility means bragging. Bragging is bad.
Right.
There's a lot of distance between talking about your work and shameless self promotion. So
Yes. There's a whole spectrum. Yes.
there's a whole spectrum. There's the personality plays a role. It's just not me, or I'm an introvert.
Mm-hmm.
And then sometimes there's women who feel that visibility is a limited resource, so they don't
Mm-hmm.
want to take it away from somebody else. So there's a complex web of reasons
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
why women might not pursue visibility, let alone seek the limelight. So what's really important in the work I think that anyone does, if this is your challenge, is to try and come up with strategies that are workable for you.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting, right? If I love that likability and competence to say if we speak too much about ourselves, then we're considered, oh, well, who does she think she is? Or that's what we think in our minds anyway,
Mm-hmm.
that maybe I shouldn't put myself out there because what are people going to think about me? I'll just stay on the sidelines and that happens a lot. I know you're talking about corporations, but that also happens. Let's say I mean, for example, for me, when I started my own business,
Oh,
the social media aspect is like, well, if I put myself out there, what are people going to think? Or how do I have to look perfect? Or so it's all these
mm-hmm.
things that
Oh,
in terms of the visibility, there's so much there. And I'm glad that these issues are being talked about and these things are being talked about. And I think more and more women are realizing that I hope anyway, that they can speak up and they do have the opportunity to without having to worry about the judgment from others. So, so
Absolutely.
there's a lot of things there that we need to work on still. So
And there are the beauty of it is that there are some fairly simple strategies you can put in place to start to increase your visibility.
yeah, I know that I was reading one of your blogs, and you have some one of your great articles that you have, and you were talking about women in their 50s and beyond, and how they experience kind of a unique combination of becoming empty nesters, and yet they also have this amazing experience that you mentioned before, and they may have financial freedom because they've been working for a long time or whatever. And so it actually is a perfect time for them to either accelerate their careers or start something new, maybe a new business, as we discussed. And then you talk about 4 questions that can help women in midlife really to rethink and achieve their professional goals. And maybe you could share what those 4 questions are. I know it's a long article, but maybe you could just kind of summarize some of the questions that we could ask ourselves.
Okay, absolutely. So I full disclosure, well, all of my writing is based on experiences that come up in my practice and or what I experience. So it's not just coming out of nowhere. And so this article was actually inspired by a number of women that I was coaching at the time, and they were between 52 and 58. And they were like, my son's just gone off to college. My kids are gone. I've got some money. Actually, I'm really excited about ramping up. I can actually be based anywhere in the world. So this was very much inspired by their experiences and looking differently at what it means to be a woman in your mid-career.
Yes.
So there's a few questions. The first one is, what would your career look like if nothing was in the way? And that's really designed, it's a big question. And actually, if you're not in a career space, you can change it and say, what would my contribution look like if nothing was in my way? And here, what you really want to think about is what you want your desired future to look like between now and then. So in the article, there's a few sub-questions to help you think about what's missing in your life, what's missing in your work, what kind of difference would you like to make in the world? What does your dream job look like? If you could make a career move or you could make a contribution and you knew you wouldn't fail, what would it be? And also thinking about your legacy. What do you want to be remembered for? So that first piece is really getting at your dream. What do you want to do?
Yeah, I think it's more, and then I love that because it's around what I kind of approach it as kind of, it's a visioning, right? How do you envision yourself?
Beautiful.
In 20, 30 years. And how do you envision, if you're looking at yourself and when you're 80, what do you want to look back at and be proud of, right? So that's a great question.
Beautiful.
And this is exactly the type of the cohort of women that I'm working with, is that because there's so much potential, right? And by asking ourselves these questions, anyway, sorry, the first question was, what would your career look like if nothing was in your way? So what's the second one?
Second one is, yeah, I know we could talk about each of these for a session. The second one is really, what permission do you need to give yourself in order to become who you want to be? And this kind of gets to the limiting beliefs we have. And, this isn't about, I'm not suggesting about fixing yourself and putting the onus on women, but this is what what your inner critic says. Which social norms or gender norms hold you back. So what permission do you actually need to give yourself in order to show up in the way that you'd like to be? And I think this is really important because we want to free those resources, our access, that potential is, as you call it, potential. Absolutely.
Yes. And I like it. What permission do we need to give ourselves not
Yes.
others. It's ourselves. We
No,
have to give
ourselves.
ourselves the permission to do whatever we need to do.
Absolutely.
Yes,
I
that's a
don't know if
key.
any, exactly. I'm not sure if you can relate or your listeners can relate, but I can assure you I'm my own worst critic. And sometimes I have to constantly ask myself this question to remind myself.
Yes, we all have those saboteurs, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah. The next one is really, this is a very important one in my opinion. They're all important, but how could you build access and support for your network? And this really brings up this whole notion of we are not an island. We are built for connection. A lot of times we just haven't mined or leveraged. I don't necessarily like that word leveraged, but for lack of a better word, how can you have more relation and connection in your life so that you can contribute more? And in the article, there's a nice exercise that can take you through how to do that. One exercise. I know I mentioned this too. I actually have a course around this.
Yeah.
And then the final question.
Before you go, I wanted to point out that when you were talking about your own life, and that stood out to me, is that when you were going into your coaching, you went back to your previous corporate, like where you were working before. I think you said that you went.
Yes.
I'm trying to read my notes, but yeah, you went back to the work that you were doing before and leveraged those connections you had, right?
I did. Absolutely.
Yes. And so many of us don't do that. Like, because we think, oh, if we leave something, then that's it. We're not going to
No.
like reach out to those people because what are they going to think? Whereas we need to do that more and more. And in fact, I need to do that more and more. I'm realizing that is that we have built so much credibility and experience, and people know us for what. So why not take advantage of that or leverage that, as you said? So sorry, I just wanted to point that out because you gave such a great example earlier.
I think, well, thank you for highlighting that because that is so important. And I think sometimes if you don't have the right mindset around networking is arguably an unfortunate word because it's about building relationship and building connection based on generosity and reciprocity. And when you think of it like that, I don't know many people who would say no to it. But we have this clinical term called networking that really puts people off. So we want to try and think about it differently and then start to think, if you think like that, this is about building connection. And if I succeed, I can help other people succeed. Then it's a very different way you look at this and invite it into your life.
Yes.
I think that's important to remember.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
And then the last question is about your learning. What do you need to learn? You gave a beautiful example of how when you were starting your business, actually, you talked about social media, and I'm making the assumption, and I shouldn't do that you had to learn a little bit about that and how to do it. But I know I did.
Oh, yeah. I mean, even what we're doing right now, I mean, podcasting, really? Yeah, who knows how to podcast? You have to learn it. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's not a natural thing.
No.
Yeah, right. So, but if you really want to learn it, if you want to grow, I believe.
Me too.
If you want to grow, then you need to figure out what you need to learn. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think sometimes as we get older and also with these kind of unfortunately outdated notions of leadership, you have this idea of, well, I should know everything. So I'm not going to ask, or I'm embarrassed to ask, or I'm ashamed to ask, when the best leaders are learners and the best leaders have the best questions. So when you start to remember this, then it's wonderful. Why wouldn't you want to continue to learn? So that's an important piece of rounding it out, finding out what you need and want to learn. So those are the 4 key questions to help you think about your second or third act. I like to think I've got a third act.
Oh, I think you do. Those are, yes, at least those are wonderful questions. And I'm definitely I do a highlighting at the end of the podcast, and I'm definitely going to highlight those because they're very important. And I'm actually going to look back and ask myself that because I think it's an ongoing process that we can ask ourselves continually. Right. So thank you so much for sharing that.
My
And
pleasure.
I know we could go on for a long time. But yeah, I know. There's another article that you wrote about, and I also believe this
Mm,
very much. And it's about honoring ourselves and where we are right
mm,
now. And also, it kind of goes back to the visibility and the gift of being listened to.
mm,
And how do we kind of practically do that? And so I think you talked about something called the RAIN model. So
mm.
maybe you could briefly describe that.
Absolutely. Well, if you permit me to just back up a
Yes,
small step,
absolutely.
I do want to say that I think that most people, we've never been trained, unless you're a coach and a few other professions, you haven't been trained as a listener in general. So we all have work to do around listening. So what tends to happen is you get good at listening to others and then you might forget about yourself. So I have a very strong emphasis on the importance of self-care. And as you mentioned, listening to yourself is one of those components. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think what's so important is having this holistic and comprehensive view of listening, where you're listening to yourself with your mind. Okay, what's my mind telling me? What are my thoughts that I'm having right now? My body, what's going on in my body? What's my body telling me? What does it feel like? What's the quality of the sensation? Is there a color? I mean, this isn't new.
Mm-hmm.
But the spirit, what's my spirit telling me about what's happening, or my higher connection? What do they have to say? And what does my context or my environment tell me? And so it's really about paying attention to all of this with curiosity, and as you know, as a coach, being non-judgmental. And it's all of this is about being kinder and more compassionate to ourselves. And I do want to flag that I find that sometimes women are not as kind to themselves as they could be.
Mm-hmm.
I also think that leaders fall into that camp as well. And so if you have the overlap of a woman leader, and then maybe you throw in some perfectionist tendencies, it can be very difficult for women to be kind to themselves. So I'll just speak to this very briefly because I would never want to. I think the woman behind this, Tara Brach, I hope I'm saying her name right, and the
Mm-hmm.
RAIN model, she does such a beautiful, there's a small video on YouTube that I watch, many people watch, and it's about the RAIN method. So the R
Yes.
stands for recognizing what's going on. So here again, you're paying attention to yourself. And
Mm-hmm.
again, thinking about maybe the different areas, mind, body, spirit, etc. The
Mm-hmm.
A is about allowing the experience to be there just as it is. So again, this is where we're not being judgmental and harsh with ourselves. We're not bringing any judgment. We're just letting it be or allow.
Mm-hmm.
The
Mm-hmm.
I is the investigating with interest and care. And this is where we're bringing in curiosity, which is so important and generative. And then the N is about nurturing with self compassion. So this is the part where you're bringing in the kindness that you want to show to yourself, that for many of us, we show to others, but not always to ourselves. So it's a beautiful
Mm-hmm.
RAIN acronym that
It
can
really
be,
is. Yeah.
yeah, and you
Recognize,
can use it for
allow,
yeah.
investigate, and nurture. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it's something you can use on yourself, and you
Yes.
can also use it in the context of a conversation
Yeah.
to think about a conversation. So there's many different ways you can use it, but it's a beautiful,
Yes.
I think, practice is the word I
Yes.
would use.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you for sharing. That's recognize, allow, investigate, and nurture. And I believe so much. I mean, I think through my coaching as well as my previous work, it's like
Mm.
listening is so important. And if so many people don't really listen, and it can be, and if we just, and it's not about, it's also about like, as you mentioned, it's about listening to your inner voice, your
Mm.
inner self, which I talk about a lot. And what is that your inner voice actually telling you? But also listening to the cues around you, your environment, the people that you surround yourself with. So it's very key. And I think if you listen to those things, then automatically you'll understand what your next step should be,
Oh, yes,
right?
absolutely.
And then
Yeah, the
you'll
outcome.
yes, and then
Beautiful.
you'll seize those opportunities that maybe you didn't recognize were there before, right?
Hmm.
So
Absolutely.
yes, wonderful. So this is so great. And I know that you have a wealth of knowledge and experience, and I'd like to, maybe you can tell us a little bit about what you're doing in terms of how to organizations support women in their leadership. What kind of work are you doing to develop women's leadership skills and their role in organizations and in their life? So maybe you can tell us. I think you have a new online course you mentioned, so maybe you can tell us a little bit about what some of your initiatives.
Well, thank you. I do, like I'm sure you as well, I do individual coaching and coaching in the organization along with learning interventions. And I think what I would say is, I guess if I had to kind of distill this, because it's a huge topic, first and foremost, everybody's journey is different. So I think it's important, if you are interested in becoming a leader or advancing in your career, then it's important to spend some time reflecting and planning, thinking about your leadership in the context of your career goals, your purpose, your passion, etc., and doing some reflection around that. And also, I always encourage women to look in their organization and find out, what does your company support? Kavita, I can't tell you how many times women will come for coaching paying out of their own pocket. And when I ask them, well, have you checked what your company will provide? They haven't actually looked to see. So really check your organizations. Lots of times they will provide coaching or do a cost share. Sometimes they have courses, or maybe you can suggest one. Some of my work has come through previous clients recommending me for various trainings. And I recently did a number of trainings around visibility and networking that started with clients and individual coaching. So I think that that's something that's important, is to think about where you'd like to go and what are your needs. And I know for me, I do encourage people to embrace coaching. It doesn't have to be from me, but think about coaching as a very important intervention. And that's one of the reasons that I had designed a new course. It's called Network to Amplify Value. It's an online course, self-paced online course. And again, this was coming out of my experience. Now, I've coached hundreds of women now around the globe. And honestly, Kavita, I can tell you, for every 100 women I coach, there might be 2 who say that they like networking and that they do it. So again, other coaches might have different experiences, but that's the feedback I'm getting. So given how important networking is for career advancement and leadership transitions, it is important, not to mention being a leader and contributing more fully, it is important that you have these skills.
Right.
So that's the kind of the emphasis behind the course. It's a 6-module course where you start with everything from visualizing the impact that you want to have, to assessing your network, your current network, looking at your current approach, looking at different strategies, because it has to be practical and tactical. You have to actually know what to do.
Sure.
And then the role of preparation. And this is really important for people, especially people like me, the introverts, or who might feel uncomfortable looking, what is your preparation strategy? Have you ever thought about that? And then, of course, designing a success plan. So the idea is to try and give women more tools, skills, confidence, ease to be able to create more value from themselves and create more value for others. And that's a very important component, I think.
Fantastic. Yeah. I mean, that's exactly what we need, right? Is the tools, and we need the skills. And I believe the confidence, if the confidence piece isn't there, then it's going to be hard to execute any of this. So that sounds fantastic. That's really great. And so you have a lot on your plate. You're a coach and you're doing, so do you have any other, what's next for you in terms of anything else? Are you traveling, or what's your vision for yourself, I guess I should say?
Oh, my own vision. That's interesting. Well, I guess I want to continue doing what I'm doing because I love it. And I want to continue to support women to help them let their leadership light shine, or make the contribution that there's so many good ideas. And I think it's really unfortunate and a disservice globally to humanity when we don't have the other half's voice inputting into the conversations that go on. So if my work in any small way helps people feel more comfortable sharing their voice, then I feel like that's a privilege. Mm-hmm. So I want to continue to do that, and I'm also continuing to work on some of the themes that continue to come up for me in my practice and design more online courses. You've mentioned confidence. That's a huge issue for many women. And I think that there's a lot of information out there, and it isn't all created equally. So I think sometimes it's important to have very practical and tactical tools. So I'm looking at leadership self-care, and I'm also looking at confidence.
Wonderful.
As my next projects.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Well, we'll definitely have all of your links and to where people can find you and in our show notes. And I just want to say that I've learned a lot from you today, just from our conversation. And I think that our listeners also have probably learned a lot. And what your work doing is so important, I believe, in that women have, as we've discussed, at any age, have so much to offer. And the fact that you're helping women come up with strategies and tools to bring that out is wonderful. So I thank you very much for sharing all your knowledge and experience.
Well, thank you, Kavita. It's been an absolute pleasure to be here and discuss with you. I loved hearing about your experiences. And again, I thank you for the work that you're doing.
Well, I'd love to hear, keep in touch and hear what you're doing in the future. And
thank you.
Good luck to you with everything.
Thank you. You too.
I trust you found this episode with Palena on women and leadership as informative and interesting as I did. So many pearls to apply into our own lives. Here are Palena's main takeaways. Number 1, in 2022, globally, women in senior management is at 32%. In Canada, the number of women in the C-suite is at 21%. The higher you go, the less women you have in leadership positions. The pace is very slow, and if we continue at this rate, we are not going to reach gender parity for 130 years. We certainly have much more work to do. Number 2, many social, cultural, and gender norms, as well as race, ethnicity, and the double blind bias hold women back from leading and being more visible. Women are often having to balance likability and competence. 3, a lot of time there's a strong hesitation to pursue visibility. One of the reasons is, well, my work should speak for itself. There is a gender bias in being too visible, and to many, visibility means bragging, and bragging is bad. But there is a lot of distance between talking about your work and shameless self-promotion. 4, there are 4 questions women can ask to rethink their professional goals. Number 1, what would your career or contribution look like if nothing was in the way? Number 2, what permission do you need to give yourself in order to become who you want to be? Number 3, how could you build access and support for your network? And 4, what do you need to learn? Number 5, women are not as kind to themselves as they could be, and this is true of women leaders as well. It's important to have a comprehensive view of listening, where you're listening to yourself with your mind, your thoughts, your body. What does it feel like? What is my spirit telling me, or my higher connection? And what does my context or my environment tell me? Number 6, how often do you take time to listen, really listen to yourself? And when you do, are you receptive and empathetic? Does your listening have the key qualities of caring and support that you extend to others? Use the RAIN method to help you. R, recognize what is going on. A, allow the experience to be there just as it is. I, investigate with interest and care. And N, nurture with self-compassion. Thank you again for listening, and remember, please share this podcast with your friends and family if you're enjoying it. It helps with our mission tremendously. Remember, reach out to me if you're interested in learning more about my one-on-one coaching program or my group coaching program, which begins the week of October 17th for only 10 like-minded and wonderful women. Also, watch out for me live on LinkedIn and Facebook every Wednesday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thanks again. Enjoy your week, and remember, take leadership of your life.